And without further ado, thank you again very much for your patience. I give you Professor Brauner, Jewish Business Ethics, Not an Oxymoron.
Thanks very much, Brian. Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here and studying with you again, really initiating the new, fresh academic year. Before I begin with the content of what I'd like to share with you, I'd like to mention that I offer these remarks and observations from our tradition in memory of my mother, who passed away not very long ago. And she was very proud of her son, and she liked this kind of stuff. So while I'm still at the time that I'm saying Kaddish, my thoughts turned to her, and I wanted to dedicate these remarks to her memory. We're going to talk about Jewish business ethics, and indeed, whether it's an oxymoron or not, can give birth to lots of jokes. But the fact of the matter is that this is a very serious business. And I presume that when we talk about Judaism, Jewish tradition, Jewish business ethics, that this whole subject area has a lot to do with your deciding to spend your time here a little bit, your time here tonight with us. I hope to make your time spending worthwhile by making a number of observations and also walking through that sheet of information that you were given as you came in, and if you don't have one, you can share with a neighbor. We'll get to that too. And as always, those of you who are my students know this, we've got to have time for questions and comments, and I'll be mindful of that and try to find the right moments to pause so we can catch up with what's on your mind. I'd like to do what's before us in two basic sections tonight. First, I'd like to share with you some observations about the whole field of Jewish business ethics and what Torah has to do with that and so forth. And the second part of our study tonight will be involved in looking at that sheet, the handout sheet that you have, and making some observations and adding some further information to what you have in your hands. So that's it, and let's go. And first thing to be said is, a Jew certainly should have great difficulty with the title, the term ethics, believe it or not, ethics. Not because we're particularly unethical, but because by and large the term ethics, as the world generally understands that term, is not a category of significance in Judaism, believe it or not. And you have to hear that tonight. Hopefully you hear a lot of things tonight that will annoy you, and that will have been then a good evening. First, and again, I make this point, whether we're talking about bioethics, and I've said that to those of you who have been studying with me and with us, with the college in the bioethics sphere, the term ethics altogether is a problematic term for us as Jews, and I'll try to illustrate why that is the case if you will be patient with me, and I'll get to it forthwith. Second observation that I have to make is that the term ethical and moral, or ethics and morality, have become synonymous terms. So I'm going to use them as if they are synonymous, although actually a couple generations ago, and certainly in the 19th century, they were two distinctly different things. By now, they are interchangeable, and that's the way language works. So ethics, moral, morality, but it's part of the problem, you understand. Namely, a person who is, let's say, violating an ethical principle could be called unethical, but at the same time, that person could be called immoral. There's a little extra push in that term. I think you will agree with me, right? It's a little dirtier somehow. To be immoral, immorality. But the fact is that they have, again, become synonymous and share some common origin, which I hope also will become clear from our deliberations and discussions tonight. One of the problems that I have as a teacher and as a Jew, and as a teacher of the Jewish tradition, with the term ethical is because, let's say in America at least, there is a presumption, by and large in the American population, that that which is ethical is an absolute standard. It's incontrovertible. A thing is ethical or it is not ethical, and that there should be common agreement. So it goes that what is ethical is and what is not ethical. In other times and in other venues, I have argued, for instance, and rather vehemently, against previous president's councils of committees, ethical committees of the president, advising previous presidents like George Herbert Walker Bush and so forth on the bioethical questions. And it was an ethics council appointed by the president, Bush and etc., who in fact had input from this council with respect to the ethical or the unethical nature of abortion, let's say. And everybody in this room is aware of and a witness to what has happened in the last decades in American life with respect to the category of ethical and the subsequent suspension of all federal funding to the National Institutes of Health with respect to research on fetal tissue and connected to that juvenile diabetes, Parkinson's syndrome, etc. So we're talking about serious stuff, right? For more than 8 years, there was a federal moratorium on any federal funding for scientific research done in the National Institutes of Health on anything that had to do with fetal tissue. Now, we're not doing bioethics tonight, but this is an easy way for me to demonstrate to you the severity, the depth, the weight of such a consideration about unethical. And the President's Council, Advisory Council on Bioethics, said that working on fetal tissue is unethical. That's why it was stopped. It is unethical to use fetal tissue, tissue derived from a fetus, aborted fetus, or doesn't have to be aborted, but they were talking about abortion, that abortion is immoral, and the use of the tissue is immoral, etc., etc. It's a whole other area of investigation with enormous implication for us who are sitting right here and who are, some of us, rather dependent on the good research that comes out of the NIH, for instance. So one wants to be careful with the term ethical. What is ethical, what is unethical, and who's calling it ethical and who's calling it not. Again, one last shot in the bioethics sphere, because they serve as good illustrations. When we will call, for instance, the use of fetal tissue in the non-Jewish world, in parts of the non-Jewish world, is considered to be unethical. That word actually appears in the materials that they produce, Dr. John Wilkie and so forth. It appears in the material, and here the Jewish tradition in America, which we represent, says, in fact, the use of fetal tissue for research in order to alleviate disease and dysfunction may be the highest level of merit to which fetal tissue could be put. So we're exactly on the other side of the fence. We have a committee that prohibited, through the president actually, through an executive order, funding. And here's a Jewish tradition which says, can we get more fetal tissue so we can do more research and save more lives? When we get to talking about ethics in the sphere, let's say, of business, there's no less heat, I guess, in all of this, although most immediately we're not talking about the matters of life and death. Although, in many respects, the Jewish tradition talks about money concerns as being matters of life and death, not literally life and death. But interestingly, by the way, the rabbinic Hebrew term for money, one of the terms is damim, dam. You know the word dam is blood, right? And that's basically what it is in the Torah and the other books of the Hebrew Bible. But it comes also to have the meaning of money. So interestingly, I just point you to it on that sheet that you have, that handout.